Hi there, and welcome to the Curious Collective podcast, conversations designed for the veteran and first responder community to bring awareness to those holistic practices that help us live our best life. So tap into the wisdom and knowledge of our guests to heal, transform, and live as your true soulful self. Well, listeners, I have quite a treat for you today. I have with us the beautiful Erin Jane, who's coming all the way from Boston. However, she's actually one of us. She's an Aussie. So we already love her because of that. I actually stumbled across her Instagram profile, and nothing's ever random. Synchronicities are out there for us to find. So I do believe we are meant to be connected, and I'm so glad to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Kate. This is such an honor.
Thank you. And so introduce yourself, please, to our listeners and what it is that you're doing in the world right now.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Erin Jane. I kind of typically go by Erin Jane most of the time, but I am a life and wellness coach for first responders, emergency services members, and their spouses and loved ones. So that incorporates obviously police officers, firefighters, paramedics, EMTs, dispatchers, 911 and 000 call takers, correctional officers, nurses, like the whole gambit. And basically I sort of quantify it by like anyone who serves on the front lines and like serves their community in that kind of capacity. So what I do in terms of like life and wellness coaching, it's bridging the gap between what peer support can offer people in that domain and what clinical services are for. So there's, I view mental health and wellness like on a continuum. And basically, I think that there's like a significant gray area between, what you can get from a spouse or a loved one at home, or even just a friend or like a colleague in terms of like a peer support dynamic, and then going to see like a therapist or a counselor or a psychiatrist or, anyone in that capacity. And I think that, in that sort of continuum of care, I think that's a lot of first responders kind of just get lost. Because you're like, well, if that's not, if that shoe's not fitting me, and that seems like either really daunting or I don't really think I'm like at that level, I think, there's such like a service gap. So that's what I try to fill in my capacity. For anyone who sort of doesn't know, like coaching is a partnership. And it's where I help people with sort of different aspects of their life that they might be unhappy with, or they want to improve, or, like I help them sort of like identify like changes that they want to make, or goals that they want to set, and sort of basically help them help them like achieve those goals in terms of I offer support and accountability, which is also sort of something that I think a lot of people need. They might be like, oh, I really want to do this, but unless there's someone, keeping them accountable like along the way. And then offer that support while they go like along the process of implementing those sorts of changes and stuff. And so given like my background, which obviously we'll sort of get to, and my current circumstances, like I feel that I provide like a unique sort of understanding and insight and knowledge in terms of what it is like to be a first responder, as well as what it's like to be the spouse of a first responder. So I sort of try to balance both roles in regards to that. And and also importantly, I'll sort of either offer or facilitate a space for someone to be able to like unburden themselves, or like have a bit of a debrief if they've attended a difficult job, or something like a critical incident, and it's either like bothered them or it's sticking with them and all that kind of thing. And where they can come and speak to someone who is culturally competent and knows that like I'm gonna have a bit of an awareness and like that kind of understanding what it's like to go to a job like that, and they can sort of come and talk to me about it and just unburden themselves. So that's sort of and clients, when they come to me, they can they work on, sort of like the work-life balance, trying to prevent, especially like in the first responder realm, like burnout, exhaustion is so common. So, trying to implement boundaries in regards to having that separation, and, working and enhancing your relationships, whether it's like a romantic relationship or with your children or friends or, anything like that. And obviously like goal setting, like I mentioned before. And I'm a big one for perspective shifts and, any kind of thing that, anyone sort of wants to work on. And so I personally don't offer like a little sort of one size fits all like course that it's just
and that
like,
isn't
oh,
even really going to be a thing these days, though, is it? People need that individuality type approach.
Well, and I mean, look, and it's not to like poo-poo, anyone who does that, and because obviously they've worked hard and like that's their thing, but I choose to offer, a very like personal one-on-one dynamic, because I think that to address the like very unique issues that people in emergency services realm sort of like come across and end up dealing with. I think that, I think it's my role to help them sort of like walk away with like a special amount of clarity that I think like that one-on-one and really personal and individual dynamic sort of
and
allows for.
Tools that they can implement into their daily life to perhaps, feel a bit more supported as they go and approach these situations.
100%. And the thing that I love like the most about coaching and sort of why I did fall in love with it and why I do think it's like a really valuable option for people in the first responder community is it's client led. So you're not sort of coming to me and I'm like, picking apart your brain sort of thing. Like you come to me and be like, oh, like I'm, having issues with my partner, or this is bothering me, or that's bothering me, or I'm really unhappy with this aspect of my life. And so they tell me what they want to discuss, and then we sort of like, basically like nut it out together. And I think it's especially important for this kind of like population that, we're used to being in control. We used to like, we were just like talking offline before, like we're used to bringing like, disorder and chaos, and we create the order, we maintain control. And so for people who are maybe seeking some kind of assistance in that realm, like, the idea of losing control and not being in control of how they go about getting that assistance. I think this practice like allows them to maintain that element of control. And coaching sounds a little bit like less daunting sometimes, and doesn't have like the mental health and cultural stigma that is attached to seeking assistance that it really does in first responder, emergency services, even like the veteran community. And there's no power imbalance. As I said, like it's considered like a partnership. So it's like you come to me, we talk it out. I don't give you advice, and it's basically just about me sort of asking like pertinent questions, like obviously with my background, I'm like a trained investigator. So it's like when you're talking to me, I'm not only like listening to what you're saying, but like I'm looking at like the inflection and the intention you put on words. I'm watching your body language, even over like a virtual setting, like there are tells and things are giveaways. And I think, or like my personal belief is that I think everyone has the answers to like all of the questions and all of the problems that they have inside. I think they have that inside of them. And I think that either they don't really have anyone listening appropriately, or they don't have anyone actually asking the right questions to be able to kind of have that clarity and that level of realization.
Or again, onto that, like being taught that you can actually ask yourself the questions, and introspection is such a magical thing. And unless we're mentored and guided in a way where we can understand that, then you're not going to even know to ask the questions, or you'll forget and go, oh, what am I doing here?
Exactly, 100%. And I think it leads to like, even though there's like that bit of support and assistance, when you feel like you're the one who's come up with your own solutions, it leads to such like ownership and empowerment exactly over your life choices. And I think as well that something else that probably is like an issue in that community is sometimes, a lot of first responders, they they see awful stuff, like really terrible stuff. And I think sometimes there's also that burden of like, how many people go home and like talk to their spouses about it, like a lot of them, and like that old culture of like, I don't talk to my spouse about it at all, like completely separate worlds. And that leads to so much miscommunication and feeling of loneliness and all that kind of thing. And I think there's also been that fear of, oh, well, if I go and talk to someone, sometimes people have a really negative experience, because then they shock or they frighten or they scare the clinician if they're not, culturally competent or experienced. And so then that can make them like withdraw completely. So trying to, offer that other alternative can, save like a potentially like damaging experience with someone else.
Yeah, I love that. You have just shared so much. I like.
Sorry, I'm just like blah blah blah.
Oh, I love it though. But there's so much there I want to unpack. But the main thing that's sort of overarching of all of this that I wanted to bring up is the job as a first responder, regardless of which area you're in, is so multifaceted. I mean, look, we've got the seeing the incidents, dealing with shitty people, interactions between staff and the interculture of these particular organizations themselves, shift work, adjusting to shift work with families. My husband's recently become a fireman as well. And it's just this transition from him doing this like full-time job into now 4 days on, 4 days off. How does that work with the kids? How do we navigate our weekends?
Like, oh my goodness.
And unless you're in and aligned to your values and opening up and communicating effectively, I can see already how that could be really tumultuous. And beautiful friends of mine, husband and wife, are both paramedics. They have 3 young children. It's like, how the heck do you do it? Like, how do you juggle shifts, juggle children, be present for your family, be present for yourself? Like, so it is huge. And
it is 100%. And so much goes along with it. And like you're saying, it's even like dealing with the awful people, and then just dealing, like being there on people's like worst days. That I don't think that gets any easier as time goes on. I don't think it does.
And I guess I've met as well veteran mates of mine that have now gone into, say, policing. I've met them, caught up with them years later, and they've just completely lost their faith in humanity. It's like they're an empty vessel of a human, and it's like, oh my gosh, you've changed. Like, I still love you, but where are you?
Yeah, no, and that happens like so often, and I think sometimes it's almost, whether it's like a level of disassociation or kind of almost just like self-preservation, because it's kind of like, well, if I just think everyone's terrible, then I'm not going to be shocked and I'm not going to be surprised when it turns out to be true. And what people are capable of, and that's sort of like through like my coaching journey and stuff, I sort of came across this like Brené Brown quote that kind of became like the motto of my coaching business. And it's from her book, like The Gifts of Imperfection. And it goes, only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. And that just like resonated so much with me, because there is so much darkness, like whether it's the actual darkness of death or just the depths of, I guess, like depravity that we see that humanity is capable of. And so that sort of like turned into my like coaching motto of, I will hold space for your darkness.
And also a segue into your beautiful podcast.
Yes, very much so. But yeah, that's where I drew like that inspiration from, because it resonated so deeply with me. And I'm not like ashamed to say, like I've done the personal work. Like I've obviously like been out of the job for sort of, I think like eight years now. But I've done kind of the personal work to know and be comfortable with, like, my stuff's real good. you know, I'm in a good place, like psychologically, emotionally, you know, relationally, all of the things. So that all allows me to be in a place where I'm comfortable to take yours on in terms of holding space and listening and helping you process your darkness. And and that's kind of where the impetus for the podcast came from too.
Oh, I love that. And it reminds me of something I always teach about, which is called empathic resonance, which is being able to hold space for others, knowing what's theirs, what's yours, and the barrier in between, that fine line of balance. I know there's a lot of people out there, and I want to speak into this because I want your thoughts on it, is like they want to be of service to others and they come from a pure place of heart, but they haven't actually done the healing work themselves. So they're actually in the long term doing more damage because they're taking on other people's stuff. And when you take on other people's stuff, they can't actually process it for themselves. Yes, I'd love your thoughts around that.
Yeah, well, that, and definitely like it then like you're saying, if you haven't processed your own stuff, it then re-triggers your stuff. And I think there's such danger in that. So yeah, no, I mean, I think it's weird. So I'll sort of like, you know, go into it more a little bit later. But when I first moved over to Boston, I worked and volunteered at a suicide prevention and crisis counseling organization. And so that's, you know, taking phone calls from suicidal people, like, you know, that's what it is that you do. And weirdly, I was always okay with it. And maybe it's something that I like naturally learn as a police officer, that I feel like I have like a healthy level of disassociation. Like I can still be affected, and I'm a very empathetic person, and I do feel things deeply, but just to be able to go like, you know, I can feel that, I can feel that empathy towards you, but it's not sort of going to impact me in like a personal sense where it's going to like ruin my day or burden me or anything like that. And I think that's I honestly don't know like how it came about. It's just something I think I just developed over time, and like experience. And then you know, there's also like an element of like a removal element, you know, like being on the phone to someone when they're in that manner. And I remember going through the process of like applying for the job and all that kind of thing, and they were like, oh, you know, like how are you going to feel if you're on the phone to someone and you know, you don't know whether they lived or died, and you don't know, have a resolution for it. And not to sound callous, because it's not meant in that kind of way, but I'm like, unless I have to go and like find their body, it's like I'm good. Like I know I'm going to have done the very best possible, and I'm gonna wish the very best for them, and I'm gonna hope that they're okay and have gotten some help. Ultimately, it's out of my control, and I'm going to do the very best that I can to help them in the capacity that I can. And I think it's remembering what our capacity is and doing it to the best of your capability, but knowing that you're like, that's it, that's what I have to give, and I can feel really passionately about it, but I can't let it impact me into the way that's going to be like a detriment to my mental health, my family, my kids, anything like that.
I love that. And we could even use that beautiful example you've just done on a wider scale. Like there is chaos and mayhem happening in the world, but I cannot
massively
control the outcome of that. So therefore, I literally have not watched mainstream news for the last 2 years, have not even watched it. And I don't miss it at all, because I find those that are caught in the vortex of this is happening, that's happening, have you heard about this? It's like, what can you do? You know, you can do you and look after you.
And it's easy to get like caught up in it all, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. So please share with us. I love that you're working in this first responder space, because it's detriment that we have amazing people like you here doing this work. What actually got you to doing the work you're doing now? Like, what was your story, your journey?
Yeah, so I was a police officer in Australia for 9 years, 8.5, 9 years. So yeah, I joined when I was like 21 or 22, and I loved it. You know, it was sort of not a lot of people get to do like their dream job, and that was my dream job. I really loved it. And you know, I spent, I mean, I'd probably still be doing it if I was still there, but at some point along the way, I traveled to Europe and met my now husband, who happens to be a firefighter here in America. And we just sort of hit it off, and 9 months later we got married, and it's been 10 years. Our anniversary was a couple of months ago now, so 10 years of wedded bliss, and 2 kids later, and here I am.
I love too, as well, as you've got full exposure to the looseness of the US first responder space, like as opposed to the Australian, more, I guess, rigid and policy controlled. Whereas I guess I've heard and watched many things where it's a little bit looser in the US, but they've also got like some really full on things to go to.
Yeah, so where we live, it's sort of like a very like busy metropolitan fire department, and again, like, like you're saying, the American systems are very different. Each city has its own police department and fire department and all that kind of thing, but the one that my husband works for, it's quite like a large one for like a metropolitan one. It's like just outside of Boston. And so they do 24-hour shifts.
Yeah,
so he works twice a week. So he does like 24 on, 48 off, 24 on, 96 off.
Oh, wow.
And that's so it's similar to Australian fireys. Like they know their roster. I basically just like highlight 2 days a week. It's like, that's when Dad's working.
Yeah.
But so it's and it's interesting. So, obviously I never envisaged sort of either A, not being a cop, and then B, being in the role of a spouse to a first responder. So that was sort of, a bit of like a learning curve, I guess, just in that sense of I hadn't been on the other end of like that holding breath, like anxiety in the pit of your stomach when your other half sort of going to something kind of full on, or you're getting that late night text going, so don't freak out, but I am in hospital type of deal. But I think it sort of has given us a really good balance. So sort of just in terms of like understanding the nature of like the stuff that he'll attend. And I mean, he's been on the job for, God, I think it's like maybe 22 years now.
Yeah, wow.
So he's been doing it, for a long time. And so he's fairly seasoned and experienced. And, I often, call him fairly heartless, but he doesn't get rattled, very much these days. But I think it's more just kind of knowing how to find that balance in like the off time. So it's like we do the things like, he's gone for 24 hours. So I come by with the kids and I bake cookies for the crew and, try to create that kind of like, community and support. But I think it's more as well, like knowing when he comes home and having that sort of unspoken dialogue half the time of like, I can tell by his demeanor, by his body language, like what kind of night he's had. And he obviously, he's wonderful and comes and shows up, he's really on when he comes home and sees the kids and walks them to school and stuff. So it's really kind of about like, what do you need from me right now to make it so you're okay? So, and like little things like we use like a sauna. We have a sauna in our basement, and that's, really good to kind of get all like that cortisol and adrenaline that pumps through his system. So we found that really beneficial because firefighters are at such increased risk of cancer and all, and obviously like, mental health and behavioral health things and all that kind of thing. So that's like, so I'm like, I'll pop the sauna on, make you some scrambled eggs. Like what can I do?
What a wife.
I mean, he might disagree with how good I am on certain days, but it's like that sort of like where we've sort of struck that balance of like, knowing the things that are going to kind of like, I want to say trigger, but like are gonna impact him, I would say is probably a better word. Like as soon as he walks in the door, how can I sort of like minimize that, and just understanding what it is like to do, like I finished my career working in the crime department at a squad that dealt with like crime, kidnappings, non-fatal shootings, like a pretty high volume, like high intensity sort of work. And we would just do like multiple, 18, 20-hour shifts, like day after day after day.
Yeah.
So kind of like just having that level of understanding of you might be like kind of a bit jacked up, but you're also really fatigued. And I think one thing that is very much plays into it, it's like the mental fatigue and the exhaustion of decision making. So, I know like I used to kind of like someone like, oh, like what am I going to eat? Like just the enormity of that kind of decision would really just be like wipe you out. So, I could be like, do you have any thoughts or anything, about what we're going to have for dinner or what you want to do today? And he'll just be like, as long as I don't have to be involved, I'm like, done.
Yeah, I get that.
So yeah, that decision fatigue too. Sorry, just sort of, I don't know, maybe I've just been
like a
like
supportive framework around it. And I think what's also coming up for me there is like, for the actual first responder, like listening to the cues of their body and, being accountable for their own actions and feelings and how they are, but also then communicating that to the household, whoever that it might be, partner, spouse, mother, father, whatever. Having that, yes, unspoken, definitely learning the cues, but at the start, perhaps definitely open lines of communication, I feel, is a really big one to create that balance that you're speaking about.
Yeah, and that hasn't, happened from, me just like I can read his body language and his demeanor and everything now, but it's come about from, like that open conversation of like, okay, like how can I help you? Like actually just asking the question, because when we don't, it, there's miscommunication at play. We can, especially like, I'm sure everyone does it, but especially as females, we can often like internalize their behavior and go, oh, like, what have I done wrong? Why is he mad at me? And it's like, he's not mad. He's just freaking exhausted, or he had like a really terrible shift, and he gets like upgraded to deputy a lot. So he's in charge of half the city for like 24 hours. It is. And so, when like that, like decision fatigue happens. And I think, as well, like we, I won't sort of go into the details of it, but as in like, we have sort of like a dirty, humid, scale of like how bad his night was. And I'll be like, what are we talking about here? And he'll be like, oh, it's like this. I'm like, okay.
I've got you.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's like, I'm a believer, whether it's first responder, relationships or not. Like I personally don't think that a marriage or a relationship is always going to be 50-50. Like I think it's kind of, it ebbs and flows in that 60-40, 70-30, 80-20. And even dear old Brene sort of talks about it a fair bit too in her work. But it's like, when I'm sort of got like 10% left and I'm like, oh my God, like that's when like he swoops in, and because he only works 2 days a week. So it's like that ebb and flow, and that sometimes there needs to be a little bit of give and a little bit of take, and I think just trying
especially
to
when there's children involved as well. It's like you've got to be
100%.
able to weave. And I guess your sister gave you some beautiful advice once before, and I'd love you to talk into that you shared with me earlier about the rhythm.
Yeah, sure. So my beautiful sister, and she's actually a psychiatrist. So very, very strong in the mental health realm. But she came over after I had my first child, and you have no idea what you were doing. And then she was just a breath of fresh air. She'd had 2 children herself, and just is a very calming influence, you know, in my world for me. And I think I was talking about, you know, trying to get a routine in place and all that kind of thing. And you know, you got this little baby and you don't know what you're doing. And she kind of, you know, just turned around and said to me, babe, she's like, instead of sort of thinking of a routine, because that's like maybe a little too rigid, she's like, think of it as a rhythm. And a rhythm, like it ebbs and it flows and it goes up and it goes down. And it means that, like, you know, if this nap is like only this amount of time, or this feed is only this time, well, then that's okay. Because like you're gonna, like, the rhythm's gonna catch up. And it's just, it kind of gave it, or like softened the edges of, you know, what you felt like daunted by when you're a new parent. And it's, yeah, like, I mean, my eldest is nearly 8, so
but I don't feel it like just applies to kids or babies. Like when you shared that with me originally, I'm like, this is the flow of life. Like we can't be so rigid and structured. And yes, in the first responder realm, it is a systems, processes, structures, you know, you've got to systematically do that. But you know, the bowl holds the water. Without the bowl, the water just goes everywhere. So we need structure within our flow. But I feel like as well, it's a very masculine energy dominated role where we have to be go, 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 do, do, do. So we've got to look for that flow. We've got to look for that femininity. We've got to look for that softness and bring more of that in.
Yeah, massively. And like I said, like I'm naturally a very empathetic kind of person, but I think sort of being on like a parenting journey, and then as well as like through like, you know, my coaching stuff, learning to come at almost everything from a place of compassion. And there was like a great book that I read, or like I think I read, you know, 2 books in like right after each other, and they sort of just changed my whole mindset. And you know, obviously the first is The Body Keeps the Score, which
I love that book.
And the other one, it was What Happened to You? And it's Dr. Bruce Perry, and I think Oprah is sort of part of it as well. And it just makes it seem, instead of, you know, when someone's acting in a particular way or behaving in a certain way, instead of like that coming from that judgmental place of like, oh, what's wrong with them? It's like, oh, what's happened to them to cause them to be like this, or to act like this, or to feel
respond this way. Yeah.
Yes. And it just leads you from a completely different place. Like no, like, yeah, less judgment and more compassion, more empathy, and just curiosity.
Oh yes.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, and that even weaves back into that asking the questions. I mean, this is a point of reflection as well, is like, you know, why is this person acting this way, you know, and how do I feel about this, and like that exploration of self. So I love all that you've shared with us so far. There's so much more we could go into, but I do want to say just now, like, if people are looking for that mentorship and that guidance that your coaching provides, like what, and they're curious and they're peeping in the door, what advice do you have for them to just, you know, get after it?
In terms of like coaching, or just
like looking into that as an alternative to perhaps other things that they've tried and hasn't worked?
Yeah, I mean, like there's, I don't know if it's like as big of a thing in Australia as much as it is in America, but I think just, you know, going into it with like an open mind, you know, that level of curiosity, and just, I mean, I think that we have these people, right? And I don't know if it's as happening as much as it did in the past, but you know, these people are living these 30, 40-year careers as first responders, and how many of them do we know that like they retire and then like 3 months later they have a heart attack, or they end up with a drinking problem, or they get divorced, or all of the things. And I think what I view coaching as is, it's sort of a way of being proactive about your mental health and your wellness instead of being reactive. And look, obviously, like, you know, coaching has a level where like I can help you up to, and obviously if you need like clinical assistance, if you have a mental health disorder or a behavioral health issue, like that's where you go up into like the other stratosphere. But you know, there is great power in talking things out, being heard, being listened to, being understood, And so I think there is a part of it that is, you know, proactive, that then can actually prevent you getting to that other point where maybe you do need some clinical assistance.
Or just setting you back on your path that feels aligned to you, rather we kind of lose our way sometimes.
Yeah.
Just and being a human.
Yeah. Oh my God. And that's the thing. And you know, it's not being weak and vulnerable by admitting that something that you do in the course of your professional duties affects you, because we are human and stuff is meant to affect you. And it actually would be more troubling if it didn't, because that means that
100%.
you've completely disassociated, you're, you know, like a sociopath, or, you know, like the other kind of gambit, like you're meant to be affected, and there's nothing wrong with that. And the cultural stigma of, you know, reaching out, admitting that you need help, like the tide has changed in regards to that. And anyone who, you know, doesn't view it like that, like they're on the wrong path,
and they're limiting themselves.
They're limiting themselves, they're limiting like the other people. And there is, you know, like even like, you know, we talked about like with my podcast, like other people sharing their stories, sharing their experiences, sharing the tragedies, and being taken to the brink of, you know, sometimes suicidal attempts, suicidal ideation, marriage breakdown, all of the things, and then sharing the way that they came back from that brink. And it creates this kind of this community and this camaraderie that then other people going, oh, like I'm not alone. Like other people feel like this is normal. And like this person did this, like you're saying, you know, there can be trauma-informed yoga, there's breath work, there's meditation, there's all kinds of other like holistic things. There's coaching, there's talk therapy, there's cognitive behavioral therapy, there's, you know, acceptance and commitment, like
try
therapy,
all the things.
Exactly. And that's why, like, it's not one size fits all. And I'm not going to be for everyone. And I'm not trying to be. I offer my services, and you know, if I'm the right fit for someone, awesome. And I'm gonna be in it with you, and help you to wherever it is you want to get to, and work on those goals and achieve that clarity and improve those relationships. But you know, equally, if like we're not a right fit, or I'm like, you know what, I think you need a little bit more than what I can provide you.
Yeah, there's going to be that authenticity and honesty there.
Yes, 100%. And you know what, like I'm studying psychology to one day be a therapist or a psychologist to treat trauma and first responders. But this is like we're talking about capacity. This is the capacity in which I can help you now.
So
and you know, if you need more, well, I will do everything in my power to help you find that next level
for yourself.
Because all I care about is you feeling good, you feeling healthy, you having that level of wellness in your life where, you know, you have adaptive coping skills and strategies, and you are living the best existence that you can, especially when like we exist in this space of service to our communities. And like I'm saying, you know, you don't want to get to retirement and have all of these demons come out and ruin it, or end up dead like 3 months later, because just the impact,
the stress on the nervous system,
your body has just, and it's finally rested for the first time in 30 years. And it's like, you know what, mate?
What is this stopping you're talking of? I don't know how to stop.
Like, honestly, like my husband like just went to a wake this afternoon of 2 of his firefighter mates. It was his brother, who was a cop, retired 12 months ago and died. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, and this stuff is real, and unburdening and unpacking all of that before you go down that path of retirement is so important.
I'm getting like, choose yourself now. Like, what are you actually waiting for? And also
proactive instead of reactive.
Proactive instead of reactive is brilliant. And also learning the skills from people much like beautiful Erin, myself, others that are out there, how to tap into that infinite well of wisdom that is actually within you, and you haven't been there yet. It's an amazing thing.
Thank you. Yeah. It's something I feel very passionately about.
Oh, absolutely. I'm with you on it. So thank you so much. It's been an absolute honor to have you with us for this podcast. I would love to have you back again to talk about specific topics, because I think there is much that we can get out there into the world through this
I talk a lot, sorry.
education space. Never apologize for that. Unapologetically you. All right. Thank you, listeners, and thank you, Erin.
Thanks for having me, Kate. Appreciate it.
Katie out.